This episode of the Big5D Podcast Summit Speaker Series, featuring Capaciti CEO Fiona Tabraham, is brought to you by the 2024 BigFive Summit. Africa's leading small business technology event takes place 19-20 March at the Radisson Blu Waterfront Hotel in Cape Town. Our conversation with Fiona focuses on the challenges and opportunities involved in providing tech job training to Africa's youth population. Her organization, Capaciti, is a unit of UVU Africa and is focused on technical skills training for African youth. Her organization partners with corporations to fund this effort, which creates opportunities for young Africans while growing the technical talent pool for African companies. We hope you enjoy the interview. Hello and welcome to the Big5D Podcast. I'm joined by Fiona Tabraham. Fiona, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks very much for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you. So you are CEO of Capaciti, which is a division of UVU Africa. Could you just take a short moment, and tell us what that is, both of those components?
Of course. So UVU Africa is a not-for-profit organization. We've been around for 25 years, and we operate at the intersection between society and government and business in South Africa. And beyond, we've extended now to sub-Saharan Africa. Our aim really is to stimulate and facilitate change, predominantly within the digital economy, and create opportunity for people-wide and societal-wide change in Africa. And Capaciti is the digital skills accelerator part of the business. So we have a mission to create opportunity for young people, predominantly in South Africa, through digital education and through bridging the gap between an education system which often lets down young people and the world of work, which often requires a certain skill set that young people aren't prepared for. And so we exist really to give those technical skills, but not just technology, the professional development, the personal development, the application learning, the sort of future world of work skills that businesses require of young people today, and put those young people into jobs.
Okay, so essentially your division of UVU is basically about giving young people in South Africa and other parts of Africa an opportunity to, through digitally upskilling, to gain job opportunities. Is that a fair summary? Would you give it a better summary?
Absolutely. No, it's definitely a fair summary. I think it's a very interesting question because, there's a whole value chain between giving someone a set of skills or a certification in something digital versus making them employable. And Capaciti sits very much in that part of looking at the employability of a young person and making sure that we address the holistic skills gap. So it's not just about saying, I've ticked that box, this person now is certified in X or has done a certain qualification, but also looking at what are the barriers that are preventing that person, predominantly from marginalized areas, being able to walk in through the front door. We often say, a lot of our youth wouldn't be able to walk in through the front door of big corporates in South Africa or other countries. And we work out what the gap is, what the barriers are, and we actively address those.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, but I noted something on your website where you use the phrase digital citizen. I've heard that phrase used elsewhere. How important is that phrase to your work, to your mission? And could you give us a sense of what a digital citizen is? And guess where I'm going with that is, if we can define that, what do you sort of define as someone who's been transformed into someone who has the skill set to find employment in the modern economy? Is there a list of skills that they have to? Is there a set of boxes to be ticked? Kind of explain that a little bit. Yeah, I know. I'm sure you'd like it to be simple, but
yeah, it's a fascinating question, and I think we've got to put it within the context a little bit of South Africa as well. I spent a large amount of my career working in the UK and with a European sort of first world marketplace, predominantly with young people. But there you had a population that was what you would term a digital native. They'd probably grown up with digital technology from a very, very young age. They've had access to iPads and computers at home and laptops and games and gaming and you name it. You know, there's an immersion in digital technology that comes naturally to a lot of young people in that from that part of the world and from the economy. And if you then take that and translate that within an African context, it's not always the case. You know, we have a large majority of youth in Africa that are growing up in rural areas, that are growing up in poorer families where the cost of data is so huge that they can't afford to have unlimited Wi-Fi or unlimited access. Where
Mhm.
there may be one computer in a school, where there may be the only technology that people interact with is perhaps a smartphone. And when you look at someone being a digital citizen, it's saying within a work environment or a commercial environment or an area where people are likely to earn a sustainable livelihood, the it is expected or most likely that those young people would walk into a job on the first day and be sat down in front of a computer and being expected to know how to log on and to type and to send an email and to do an Excel spreadsheet or a PowerPoint presentation or whatever it might be without without a deficit of skills. And
Mhm.
so the word digital citizenship, it's an interesting one. So it could be as simple as I can operate within a digital world. I can do my online banking. I can Google something. I can find out information. I can apply to the job that asks me to apply through an email address or with a CV. I can go into a job, can do an online application, etc., etc. You know, it's the basic fundamentals of digital ability that we take for granted because actually we've always grown up with it. But in sadly, a lot of cases with our African youth, that's not the case.
Right. I almost think of this as sort of a digital world analog to what we used to think of as sort of the pre-digital world of having basic adult skills, like how to apply for a job, you basically know how to get by in the world. Uh, and these days, that means really having facility with devices and essentially the digital world around us. Is that essentially what you're describing?
Absolutely, but then also, you know, there's a big drive and a push, and for the right reasons, you know, to get learning online. I mean, you know, open edX and all the available content that's now available on YouTube or you know hundreds of different platforms to learn and advance your skills. If you live in an environment where you don't have consistent access to the internet or you don't have the devices to access that, you're automatically excluded from learning new skills. And so
Right.
it's a much wider and broader problem statement, really. You know, if you're going to take a population in Africa where you know you look at South Africa, a third of the population is what constitutes youth, and if you're going to say, are these young people prepared for a job, and whether that is a very basic job, you know, if you think now you might have a job in retail, or you might have a job waitressing, or you might have a job doing manual labor. In a lot of those cases, people are asking you now to do things online or to do things with
Right.
point
Like,
of sale
for
systems.
example, you might have an app to uh,
Yeah,
handle all of your requests for PTO, for example. Just as one
e-
narrow example.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And
And
that's at the
also
front end of the problem statement.
to apply for
So,
these jobs
sorry.
often requires going online, right? And so without basic, you can't even get a very manual job, or at least more difficult, at least, without having at least the skills and the access to communications to apply online, for example.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's at the front end, the cold face of the problem. But then you extend that value chain out, and the space that Capacity predominantly operates in is much more of those advanced digital skills that businesses and the economy needs to grow. You know, I'm sure you've heard we talk about it all the time. Every article you open about problems with business growth, it shouts out the lack of IT skills. We haven't built a pipeline of talent consciously, and therefore we have a big gap in the skills that we need, and we're creating a false marketplace where everybody's stealing from each other, and the salaries are being pushed up and escalated because we're not growing that talent from the bottom upwards. And you know,
Right,
you know, everybody knows it takes time to develop somebody with a set of skills.
right. Of course, just teaching people how to apply for manual jobs online is not the full mission. I mean, that sort of happens naturally as you develop digital. skill set, but talk about what skills you identify. You mentioned IT, basically that covers a lot of ground, right? But talk about where you see the biggest opportunity for employment. So, and do you match that with where you do most of your training? Talk about kind of how you think about how to optimize the number of people you can help, both on the employer side and the unemployed youth side. What is sort of the mix of skills that you're optimizing for, and then talk about how you go about taking someone who, maybe doesn't have a large digital skill set and then turning them into an employable person from the technical side first. I'm also interested in what you said earlier, giving them basic sort of the softer side of being an
Yeah.
employable person, which I'd like to hear about too.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Thank you for asking. My real passion and a lot of my background and experience is in strategic workforce planning. So
Mhm.
demand planning for the skills that you as a business need. And if you think about the change, the volatility of our economy, the volatility of businesses and business change, and the growth that we need as organizations, changes in technology and how quickly those things happen, it's vitally important for a business to be able to sit down and understand broadly what the skill set it needs, what is that skill set, and how are they planning to grow or to absorb or to hire or to buy that skill set. So, I mean, broadly, you can buy in talent, you can develop the talent that exists in your business, or you can grow the talent from the bottom upwards. So where we
Right.
start is a demand driven talent approach. So sitting down with an organization and doing a gap analysis effectively of what they've got in the business, where their hot topic jobs are, where the areas that they're growing that they can't find the resources from an open marketplace. And as I say, if you're having a problem buying those resources now, well, you're pretty much guaranteed that everybody else is having a problem buying those resources, and then unless you're going to stop and think about how you build them for the future, you're going to continue that problem. It's going to get more and more worse because if you're relying on somebody else fixing it by growing the skills themselves, and you just stealing the skills further down the line, well, you're being slightly naive, I think, about the business and where you need to go. So where we start really is having those deep informed human capital conversations with businesses, identifying those skill sets. Predominantly in our world, it's in data analytics, data science, that type of role. We see a lot of the full stack DevOps, engineering sort of roles. Cybersecurity is one that's growing now. Predominantly, cybersecurity is looking for more experienced people, but again, there's a growth in the marketplace where people understand that cybersecurity skills, aren't there at scale. We look then a lot of the cloud computing, the vendor specific cloud computing skills. So people like AWS led platforms, Microsoft led platforms, Salesforce, those type of skills. Uh, and we also then do some programs for technicians, hardware support within business, help desk support. There's a big growing market in your offshoring of technical support roles, so things like software testers, software developers, those type of skills which actually a business can package and ask somebody else to do. That's a very big growth market for South Africa and Africa. But
Right.
it's predominantly those skills that you can actually say it's a high technical need, but a low work output. It's an area where you can actually take in a junior resource and invest in perhaps a slightly lower productivity while you're training that resource, but it's something that in between 1 and 3 years is going to create a very big return on your investment.
So you mentioned a lot of different skills. Talk about your structure and how you provide the education across these skills. Do you have a talk about your who's doing the teaching, for example, and how people
Yeah,
can apply, and just what the give us a sense of how you turn someone who has a young person who has few skills into somebody who's what do they apply? Do you recruit them?
yeah,
What's that process like? What's the process of the training like? Is there a graduation? I mean, give us a picture of how
of
this all
course.
happens.
Yeah. So you asked earlier, Charles, and I didn't answer you properly. The professional development element of
All right,
this.
yeah,
So
of course.
predominantly our programs run of around 12 months in length, and 6 months of that is spent in one of our technology campuses learning a lot of the technical skills, but also the professional development side of things. And the second 6 months is predominantly spent in an internship or in a placement with an organization where you get on the job skills. So
Okay,
there's three things that really underpin the pathway that we put somebody on. The first one is the technical pathway. It must be a certified pathway. It is built from a step from a series of micro credentials and micro building blocks of learning. So we learn, we apply, we test, we regulate, we come back, we learn, we repeat, and then we move through an iterative learning process. And at the same time we have a almost the same amount of time spent in the development of that young person. So we spend a lot of time with self-awareness, confidence, certainly communication skills, group presentations, teamwork, problem solving, applied learning, curiosity, all of those sort of skills that businesses expect young people to have.
right.
In a very simple format, learning, teaching someone to ask the right questions, to put their hand up, to step up, to take accountability, to take part. There are a lot of these skills that actually young people don't get to practice in the
Mhm.
education the path that they've come from. And we spend a lot of time investing in that because that's what young people, that's what businesses expect of young people.
Right,
And then in
right.
terms of
Okay.
applying to our programs, we've got an intensive selection process. We have thousands of applications, 10 times, sadly, the amount that we could ever reach. In fact, more than 10 times. We've got a very specific selection methodology because what we're doing is we're looking for potential. So we're not going out and saying, did this person get matric maths and yes or no, because that is a very lazy way to assess somebody's ability. But what we're looking at is, do they have conceptual thinking? Do they have logical reasoning? Are they able to complete a set of uh, problem statements and sort of work the logic through in those? Are they demonstrating motivation for a career in IT? Are they demonstrating the right skills and behaviors to stick at something? Resilience, grit, as we call it off in this country. You know, the availability, their drive, their personal circumstances. We do a lot of assessment on that, and a lot of psychometric assessment as well on that individual's ability to lead themselves, to think ahead, to their growth potential and things like that. So by selecting correctly in the program up front, our attrition rates on our courses is incredibly low. I mean, it's less than 5%. Our graduation rate is incredibly high, and our placement rates, some of our academy programs where we're working in partnership with large organizations, they're employing up to 100% of those candidates on
Hmm.
graduation because they've seen the talent, and it's making a huge difference to their business.
That's incredible. So you raise a point that I'm always fascinated by, which is the difference between the importance of education and the importance of aptitude. 'Cause aptitude is innate, right? Essentially, and education is, something some people have and some people don't.
Yeah.
My sense is you're much more focused on aptitude than education. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you assess aptitude. Is this a testing process? Is this an interview process? How do you glean whether someone has the aptitude you described a moment ago?
Yeah, it's a very good and important question, Charles. If you put that in the context of South Africa, we've just published our matric results, and if you follow through the learners that started in grade one, if you look at the matric year now, that amount of people that have now just matriculated, and you look at
Mhm.
how many people started in year one, there's a 39% dropout before you even actually write those exams. And then there's a 17% dropout with how many people actually pass those exams. And then there's a very small portion of that that actually gets through to qualified for a bachelor's pass. And then,
Mhm.
even young people that make it through all of those barriers and they get into university, there's a 50 to 60% dropout from year one in university to when you actually graduate. So through that process, we're losing a huge amount of talented and amazing young people. So if we use education as a proxy for talent, if we say I will only hire people that have a graduate degree in X, or I'll only hire someone that has a certain percentage in maths, we automatically excluding a large portion of a population, and that can't be right in the modern age. We can't continue doing that
Yeah.
because otherwise
The conversation's
our
happening globally,
base of
isn't it?
talent.
Yeah. And this
Sorry.
conversation's happening globally because you see organizations like Google doing certification versus there seems to be a movement away from a strict requirement of graduate certification essentially from a university. I mean, it's still important, of course. We're seeing
It's like,
some
look,
movement.
I'm certainly, yeah, in no way saying that education is not important. I'm a huge
Well, no, I
advocate
don't
of
think
it,
we want
and
that message
yeah,
anytime. Of course, it's very
yeah,
important, especially for certain roles, but it's not
absolutely.
necessary for every job, is it? And
It's not
I think
necessarily a proxy
equalization
for
is growing.
success.
Yeah, right. It's become a lot.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, I'm only hiring college graduates because that's what everyone else does, instead of understanding what skills I need, et cetera, and is there another way to acquire them, right? And that's the understanding that's developing now, at least as I'm observing. And
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
kind of where that's the lane you're operating in, right? So,
Absolutely. I mean, if you look, there's some really interesting statistics. If you're looking at successful software developers and you go back and you question them, where did you learn your trade? A large proportion of them are self-taught. There's a certain
right.
mindset, there's a certain way of thinking about things, there's a certain ability to see patterns, there's a certain type of individual that's going to sit there all night trying to code something and fix it because there's a line of code somewhere that's not working, and they're going to spend all night because there's almost an obsessiveness there. So you
Yeah,
asked me,
because
how do
they
I spot
can't sleep until it's fixed, right? Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And it's, we've got better at it. Where we started out 10, 15 years ago, and we used to say, oh, we'll build the tech skills because there's such a gap of tech skills. Everyone's going to bite our hand off. Everyone's going to, everybody's going to want anybody who can code in Java, and actually
right.
what we've realized is a huge nuance in that statement. It's not just that. There's a whole lot of things that people look for, and we've refined that, and we've refined what success looks like a lot better. We've gotten much better at finding out people that actually are going to succeed. It's an expensive game to really invest at the level that we do in young people. It's high touch, it's high intervention, it's high immersion, and so we need to make sure that if we're investing funders or grant funders in or corporates money in young people, that we must make sure that we get a success from it. So we're very
Yeah.
intentional with how we select, and there's multi-stage process from online tests to, as I say, ability testing, psychometric testing, face-to-face interviews, telephone interviews, etc. To try and spot the people that are really going to thrive.
What is your acceptance rate if you have that as a handy statistic? I mean, universities live and die on their acceptance rate, for rightly or wrongly. I wonder if you have a statistic that says of the 1,000 people who
Yeah,
apply, we accept X.
yeah, it's interesting. About 5% of the original applications.
Okay,
Depends on the program.
that's
You know,
Ivy League. Those are Ivy League numbers. I mean, you'd like to accept more,
yeah.
I'm sure. But so is that 5% your capacity, not to use a pun with your name, or is that just what the number who are meeting your requirements? Is it
I think
kind of
it's made up of a number of things. Partly because as a not-for-profit, whatever we do, we need to raise the funding. We've got to raise the demand. We've got to raise the partnerships. So we absolutely don't believe in training young people only to let them go home and sit at home again because they haven't got an opportunity to go to. So there's a limitation to finding the quality, sustainable livelihoods for young people. There's a limitation, obviously, always on funding and how much we can do. Because
Mhm.
we are a predominantly campus-based program, there's a limitation with space.
Sure.
But in the majority, it's because we've got a pretty good reputation amongst young people, and we get a lot of people tell their friends, tell their families, tell other people, and so a lot of the time we're overwhelmed with applications because people want to be part of the programs,
Mhm.
and then this. I guess on the slightly sad side is we have to ensure that whoever we train is actually going to be fit for purpose against what the corporates talent barometer is asking for. So, I know that there's a lot of really talented young people that didn't actually manage to write matric, for example, but we know that it's very, very difficult for us to open pathways into work for those young people because of the HR measurements and proxy for talent. We see slightly archaic approach to selecting for talent that is still predominantly evident here.
So that's a good transition to how I want to spend the last few minutes, which is kind of speaking from the not putting yourself in the corporate perspective, but understanding better what they're demanding, for lack of a better term, uh, and also the process you go through to bring in corporate partners.
Yeah.
So just my what I've gathered is that you don't want to take an applicant if you don't feel like there's a job at the end of the line for them, right? And how do so? I guess the question is, how long did it take to sort of match up what corporates needed, which is skilled employees, and getting over some of these preset ideas about what their talent pool should look like and how it should be acquired? Is this a long process of adjusting on their part? I imagine it's still undergoing. Talk
It's an
about that a little
ongoing, yeah, my ongoing pain. There is an
I'm sure.
ongoing
I'm sure.
advocacy. Yeah, I sit every day in front of people and say, we have got the most amazing asset in our young people in Africa. We have got vibrant, forward-thinking, innovative, resilient, team working, bright young people that we need to consider how we create opportunities for. You know, we often, very sadly, talk about youth in a very negative way. We talk about youth being lazy or apathetic, or we constantly harp on around unemployed youth and the number of unemployed youth and young pregnancies and youth being entitled or demanding. We use a lot of negative language around young people, and unless we
Mhm.
start thinking about young people as being uh, something to invest in, or something that is going to add to the prosperity and growth in your organization, it's very difficult to start thinking about solutions, positive solutions. So we get driven down a legislative or a legal based route that people say you must do X amount of training or Y amount of initiatives. And people don't necessarily think, but hold on a second, let me connect this talent gap that I've got and unemployed youth as a solution to that talent gap. So a lot of my work really is sitting down with organizations and people who are quite as equally passionate as I am about the young talent in this country, and helping them to understand what they actually need to do to create that value chain. It's not as simple as saying I'll just hire a young person. There are barriers, there are big gaps, gulfs sometimes in between what a young person is coming out of an education system with and what an organization wants. And a lot of the time, how an organization addresses that is saying, okay, well, we'll just take top universities or top graduates or top caliber candidates. But actually, you're then missing out on 95% of the other talent that exists out there. So until we start changing our narrative and start saying, actually, it's going to be positive for my business. It's going to have an economic impact on my business if I'm seen as a brand or an organization that recognizes the potential in youth and actively invests in them. The power in that narrative is huge. And so a lot of what I do is trying to sit down with organizations and help them how they translate that thinking into positive action, into positive pathways, and removing the barriers and removing the obstacles that are automatically placed in young people's ways.
Okay. So wrap up with a question. You cite a statistic on your website that you've upskilled 3,500 unemployed youth. I don't know if that number needs to be updated or not. But I guess my question is, if you have a couple final thoughts on what would it take to 10x that or 100x that over, I don't know how many
Yeah,
years that would take, but you must think,
yeah.
what is it going to take to scale that up?
So we've actually put to date, as of now, around 6,500 young people into work
Okay,
opportunities
so
and
same
careers. So yeah,
number,
so
10x that number, 100x that number. Same
great. I'm going
question.
to have to go to the marketing team. But yes, absolutely. Look, there's three things that we as a not-for-profit in what we do look for. The first one is the demand. So unlocking organizations that are willing to open their doors to young people. The second is a sustainable stipend or learning salary so that young people actually can come into a learning environment and actually learn without the worry of feeding themselves or transport or accommodation or those sort of things. And then the third thing is the investment in the training pathway or the content that we're training a young person. So as I mentioned, it's all certified. We have professional mentors who come from the industry who provide that. We have professional candidate success managers who come from a care a well-being background to provide that network of support. So we have to tick all three of those boxes to make sure that it works. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of 10x in that, we've got an incredibly agile model that can be lifted and shifted and moved anywhere. So really, it's getting a change in the attitude towards young people in the country. It's getting more organisations putting their hands up and saying, "Hey, do you know what? I'm going to ring fence these jobs for new entrants into my business. I'm going to recognise that young people are talents, and I'm going to open up these opportunities and these jobs to these young people. And I'm actively going to look at multiple pathways of entry into my business. I'm actively going to create internships and graduate programs and access programs and multiple routes into actual jobs, not just training programs where we train people and then then they're sent home, but active ways to connect your skills gap with a pipeline. So it's creating those talent pipelines. If we can have informed conversations around that, we can absolutely 10x what we do, and we can have a huge impact on the unemployment numbers in Africa.
All right. I think feels like a good point to end it on. Fiona, thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining the Big 5D Podcast Summit Speaker Series, featuring conversations about issues important to SMEs in Africa with the thought leaders slated to appear at the 2024 Big 5 Summit in Cape Town. This episode was brought to you by the Big 5 Summit, Africa's leading small business technology event, which takes place 19-20 March in Cape Town. To get involved with this event, please write to us at info@big5digital.org. This podcast is a production of Big 5 Digital and is hosted and produced by me, Charles Laughlin, Editor-in-Chief of Big 5 Digital. Thanks again for joining us, and stay tuned for more great episodes.